Ramesses' sixth tomb, number 9. This tomb is fewer than 4 meters from King Tut's tomb, and it is situated above it. With a length of 160 meters and a depth of up to 93 meters into the mountain rock, it is regarded as one of the valley's longest royal tombs. The name of King Ramesses V was discovered inscribed on the front part of the tomb, indicating that it was originally meant for him. Afterwards, Ramesses VI usurped it and finished the final section. Because they thought it contained a unique scene, the Hall of Osiris, the 5th chapter of the Book of Gates, the scholars of the French campaign, 1799–1801, dubbed it La Tombe de la Metempsychose, or the Tomb of the Reincarnation or Metempsychosis of the Soul. The English scholars also referred to it as the Tomb of Memnon, following in the footsteps of the Greek visitors who had called the funerary temple of Amenhotep III Memnon. This may have been because King Ramesses VI's coronation name, Nebmat-Ra, is the same name used by his ancestor and predecessor Amenhotep III, the greatest king of ancient Egypt. Additionally, a lot of graffiti left by Greek visitors has been noticed, which would mean that the tomb was accessible and well known while the Greeks ruled Egypt. It was probably inhabited in the 1st century AD by a community of early Christians, as evidenced by the Coptic texts and drawings on its walls. The walls of this tomb are regarded as an entire arena for religious literature, which sets it apart. There is a vast collection of religious writings in this library that address life, death, and the resurrection of the sun deity Re. The majority of the previously known religious texts, including the Book of Amdawad, the Book of Gates, the Book of the Dead, the various solar hymns, the myth of mankind's destruction, and the Book of Caverns that had previously been written on the walls of the Osiris and the symbolic tomb of King Seti I at Abydos, as well as the book Night and Day, were recorded on its walls. The Book of the Day documented here for the first time in this astrological form, as was the Book of the Earth, also known as the Acre. The entrance of this tomb is followed by 3 corridors, a tiny room, and a hall supported by 4 pillars. The hall most likely served as the burial chamber for King Ramesses V, the tomb's original owner. The tomb is referred to as the double tomb symbolically because it continues with a small chamber and leads to 2 corridors, a small chamber, and the burial chamber of Ramesses VI, the tomb's usurper. Upon entering the tomb, we are confronted with a familiar scene depicting the disk of the sun with the scarab keeper and the god Adam with the ram's head inside. Additionally, the names of King Ramesses VI, who usurped Ramesses V's tomb, are written on the doorposts or jambs. After entering a corridor, we observe a scene on the left that represents Ramesses V. Later, Ramesses VI usurps the scene and makes the appropriate changes. The king is now in front of Osiris and Re-Horachti, followed by texts and scenes from the 1st and 2nd chapters of the Book of Gates. On the right are scenes and texts from the 1st chapter of the Book of Caverns, followed by a scene showing the king burning incense in front of Re-Horachti and Osiris. As previously reported, a full image of this book was carved on the walls of King Seti I's symbolic tomb in Abydos, which is called Osirian. Merneptah had the carving recorded there. The passages from this book and its scenes were also mentioned on the walls of the tomb belonging to Queen Tawzert and her husband, King Seti II. The scenes from this book are distinguished by the oval shapes that appear to be coffins containing some gods and honored dead. Upon arriving to a corridor, we spot the winged sun disk on the exterior lintel. Numerous times along the outer lintels of the corridors, this scene will be repeated. Scenes from the 3rd, 4th, and 5th chapters of the Book of Gates are seen on the left, respectively. This is the famous scene known as the Hall of Osiris, or the 5th hour, which we previously saw in Horemheb's tomb. The French campaign members thought the scene had to do with the soul's metempsychosis or reincarnation. The scenes and texts of the 2nd chapter and the 1st part of the 3rd chapter of the Book of Caverns can be found if we shift to view the scenes on the right. Next, we come to a corridor where the passages and scenes from the Book of Gates 6th and 7th chapters are located on the left. Before this corridor ends, there's a little niche where texts detailing the myth of mankind's destruction are written. The texts and scenes from the 3rd chapter of the Book of Caverns, the preface to the 5th chapter, and the 4th chapter of the same book were all recorded on the wall across from one another in this same corridor. Next, we come to a small square room where the 5th chapter of the Book of Caverns is on its right wall and the 8th and 9th chapters of the Book of Gates are on its left. We now enter a hall with 4 pillars arranged in 2 rows. The surfaces of the pillars are covered in the normal scenes that depict the king in his various relationships with Khonsu, the goddess Meretseger Mr. Sgr, which means she loves silence and who resides at the top of the mountain in the necropolis, and Amunri with the head of a ram. Next, the king burns incense in front of Re-Horakiti and offers to Soker Osiris purifying water. He then offers to incense in his shrine. Next, a scene featuring the god Jehudi with an ibis head appears. Regarding the walls in this hall, the front half of them bore the texts of the 10th, 11th, and 12th chapters of the Book of Gates. The book's 12th chapter is notable for depicting the legendary scene of the god Nun rising the sun's boat from the primordial waters. The scarab in the center of the scene represents the god keeper, who in turn represents the sun's rebirth, along with a group of gods who could be sailors, or those in charge of the boat's operation. The sun disk approaches Nut, the goddess of the sky, and we see her standing on the head of the god Osiris, lord of the netherworld. At the top and bottom of the scene, Isis and Nephthys were each shown as snakes. This image, which is located on the left, depicts the final chapter of the Book of Gates. Texts and scenes from the 6th chapter of the Book of Caverns are located on the right. Scenes from the rear of this chamber depict Ramesses 6 purifying and burning incense in front of Osiris. The lovely scene representing the goddess Nut, the sky goddess, bending over earth is depicted on the ceilings of the 2 corridors and the following room. The texts from the Book of Day and Night were inscribed between her arms and feet. This tomb contains 2 versions of it, the one listed above and the second depicted on the burial chamber ceiling. The scene represents the beliefs of the ancient Egyptians, who thought that the goddess Nut, who gives birth to the sun every morning and swallows it in the evening, represented the sky and the sun traveled in her boat within her body in the heavenly sea throughout the day. The universe of the dead, which also exists inside her body, is illuminated in the evening by the indestructible stars. They are the ones that tell us the story of day and night. Additionally, we see scenes depicting the goddess Nekbet in the form of a big snake and a portion of the book Amduat, which records the first hour, on both sides of the corridor between the pillars on the hall's left. Below the goddess, there is another snake, which represents the goddess Neith. Regarding the right, there is a matching scene that shows the start of the 6th hour of the book Amduat and the goddess Meretseger in the shape of a large snake. A serpent that stands in for the goddess Circuit is also located beneath the goddess. We now descend to a corridor where passages and scenes from the book Amduat have been recorded. The 1st, 2nd, and partially 3rd hours are visible on the left, and the 6th, 7th, and partially 8th hours are visible on the right. Texts from the book Day and Night and scenes depicting the sun deity stand out on the ceiling of this corridor. Then, we arrive in a corridor adorned with passages and images from the book Amduat. The hours from 8 to 11 are shown on the right, whereas the hours 4 and 5 are depicted on the left. There are talismanic scenes on the ceiling. Next, we enter a small room with recorded texts and scenes from the Book of the Dead on the walls. There is also a scene depicting King Ramesses VI worshipping the goddess Mot and 2 square ponds, as well as the god of magic and hidden power, Hika. Regarding the ceiling, images depicting the ancient Egyptians' conception of the god Osiris' resurrection were recorded. We finally reach King Ramesses VI's burial chamber, which has a huge granite sarcophagus in the center. The surfaces of its 4 pillars, which represented the king in his many relationships with the gods and goddesses, were covered in scenes. The king is presenting a miniature statue of Matuta, the deity with the head of a falcon, before Anubis, offering fat to the goddess Meretseger before Osiris, and presenting a miniature statue of Matuta inside his naos. This room ceiling is characterized by astronomical scenes that show the goddess Nut as a bent woman, with scenes and texts from the Book of Night written inside her body on the northern half and texts and scenes from the Book of Day on the southern half of the ceiling. There were also numerous religious passages and scenes depicted on the room's walls. The recording of the Book of the Earth known as Acre, which is known for its well-known image of a lion lying down with its two heads facing opposite directions, one representing the west, yesterday, on the right, and the other representing the east, today, on the left, may be what's new in this instance. The sun disk is held in the middle by the outstretched arms of Nun, the god of the primordial waters. The god Tatanen is positioned ahead of three standing mummies to the right of the arms. Schott speculates that he might be referring to the primordial hill, where the boat of the evening sun that lands in the world of the west is received. In the center of this sun boat is the god Keeper, who has the head of a ram, to the right is the spirit of Adam, and to the left is the spirit of Khepri, both of whom are represented by the bird Ba, which has the human head. Here, it is noted that the sun boat travels in a straight line, marking its course, until it descends to the primordial waters Nun, where it finds the earth god Tatanen welcoming it. From there, the sun boat travels through the earth's depths until it meets the god Nun once more, who pushes it to begin a new day. Additionally, it is noted that yesterday's sun boat is seen on the right, pulled by 7 Ba birds with human heads, and that both the sun god, with Khepri in front of him, and Horus, the boat captain, are seen inside. The god Nun, the god of the primordial waters, is seen leading 3 standing mummies to the left of the outstretched arms. He is pushing the boat of the morning sun, while 14 cobra-like snakes with human heads and arms are dragging the boat of the new day's sun. These scenes are located to the burial chamber's right. We also see a strange depiction of a crocodile with a god in the form of a mummy. The burial chamber ends with a small room whose back wall shows the famous scene of the god Nun holding the sun boat, which represents the 12th chapter of the Book of Gates.